Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, the U.S. Supreme Court upholds a key provision of the Affordable Care Act. We'll find out why the Phoenix Aviation Department failed to challenge federal flight path changes, and what does it mean now that Lake Mead has fallen to record low levels. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. The U.S. Supreme Court today upheld nationwide tax subsidies for those who qualify for the Affordable Care Act. It's the second time in 3 years that the High Court has rejected a major lawsuit against so-called Obamacare. Joining us now is ASU law professor Paul Bender to help us make sense of all this. Good to see you again. Was this decision a surprise?
I don't think so. I think if most people who follow the court and these things had a guess, they would have guessed it would probably come out this way. I think the vote 6-3 rather than 5-4 might be a little bit of a surprise.
Well, what happened there? What do you think went on?
Why it's 6-3 rather than 5-4?
Yes.
There are a couple of possibilities. Roberts' vote was not required for the result, but he might have joined that result in order to be able to write the opinion himself. If Roberts stayed with the dissenters, then Kennedy would assign that opinion, and who knows who he would assign it to. I don't think he'd assign it to himself, but we'll see. And also, when you read Scalia's opinion, if you're John Roberts, you don't want to join that opinion.
Well, I want to get to Scalia's words in a second, but the significance of Roberts writing the opinion. Talk to us about that.
It's a good opinion. It's not as good as I'd like it to be. It's a statutory construction question. How do you read a statute? And he generally says good things about how you read a statute. It's not quite as good as I'd like, but it's pretty good. Whereas Scalia is just off the charts in how unresponsive he is to the purpose of the statute. Basically, the dissent's position is if Congress makes a mistake in drafting the statute, too bad on them. They're just going to have to fix it, even though we know exactly what they wanted to do. Whereas Roberts is saying, look, we know what they wanted to do. You can read it that way, and so that's the way we're going to read it.
Roberts wrote, a fair reading of legislation demands a fair understanding of the legislative plan. Congress passed the Affordable Care Act to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them.
And everybody knows that. And so what you do is you try to interpret the statute to conform to what we know Congress's purpose was, if the words can bear that meaning. Whereas what the dissent wants to do is to take 4 words totally out of context and say, we know what that means, and we don't have to look at anything else because those words are clear. It says state exchange, that's what it means, and therefore that's the end of the case. And Roberts says very clearly that you got to look at the whole statute before you decide whether words are ambiguous. They may look very clear if you take them out of context, but if you look at them in the context of the whole statute, you'll find other places where they use the same words that mean a different thing. And so you understand whether or not it's ambiguous. And he does that, and I think he very well describes why those words here are ambiguous. And he says, okay, once we know they're ambiguous, then we got to look to try to result. They could mean this or that. We ought to pick the this or that that is most in tune with the purposes of the statute.
Scalia in his dissent wrote, besides calling it jiggery-pokery and pure applesauce, which is interesting.
Like that if a Supreme Court justice
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But he said words no longer have meaning.
Yeah, well, see, that's what I get upset with him about. He knows better than that. A statute is a communication. It's Congress communicating, here's what we want to do. And it should be read as a communication. If I write you a 5-page letter, here, a 1,000-page letter, and you want to know what words in it mean, you don't take a phrase out of it, 4 words, and say, I know what those mean. You only know what they mean in the context of what I'm trying to tell you in the whole letter. We all know that people use language that way. Now, Roberts makes a good point that this statute is badly drafted, which it is, and he explains it. It's badly drafted because they used the reconciliation process, which meant that they wouldn't have a filibuster and everything was secret so that nobody knew what was going on. There's no legislative history. So Roberts said that's unusual. And Congress doesn't do a great job of drafting statutes a lot of times, and they didn't do a great job here. But what does the court do when Congress doesn't do a great job? They say, sorry, we don't understand, we're not going to enforce that statute. Clearly, they should not do that. They ought to try to make the statute mean what it's clear that Congress meant it to mean, if it's clear what Congress meant it to mean. And here, when you ask that question, it's clear what Congress meant it to mean. There's no reason why Congress would want to have subsidies for people who couldn't afford health insurance only in states where there is a state exchange, and not in states where the federal government established the exchange because the state didn't want to.
Critics of this attempt to overturn the Affordable Care Act say that there was a gotcha attempt, using those words, trying to take those words in their minds out of context.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a gotcha.
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Well, yeah, I think what happened is people who were opposed to Obamacare just combed through the thing to try to find things that they could challenge, and they found this. And they got some plaintiffs to challenge it. And the plaintiffs say that the reason they're challenging this is that they don't want the subsidy. Because if they get the subsidy, they'll have to get a health insurance policy, and they don't have a health insurance policy. So that's the plaintiff's interest in this case. The court could have dismissed this case with the plaintiffs lacking standing, but it's kind of a phony lawsuit that was discovered or made up by people who want to challenge Obamacare. And that's what happened last time as well. Whether there are other things in the statute that they can look to find to challenge, I don't know.
As far as Roberts, again, in the majority, Kennedy in the majority, and Roberts writing the opinion, what does this say about the Roberts court? We talked about this during the last Obamacare ruling.
We will find out a lot more about that in the next few days to see what's going to happen, mostly with the gay marriage case. If Roberts again in that case joins Kennedy and the liberals, as most people think Kennedy's going to go with the liberals in that case, if Roberts joins them, that'll be an indication that, hey, Roberts may be pulling away from the real conservative group on the court.
Is he pulling away from conservative ideals, or is he trying to mold the legacy of the court or make the court less partisan than most think it is?
I don't think he's trying to make the court less partisan, because he's done so many things that make the court more partisan. I think he does care about the reputation of the court. He cares about the court. He spent his life working with the court, and he reveres it as an institution, as I think he's right to do, and he wants to make sure that it keeps being thought of as a really good institution. So that's part of what he's doing. And here I think he is honestly saying, look, the statute's constitutional. We already held that. If the statute's constitutional, we should not interpret it in a way that destroys the purpose of the statute.
Last question before you go. Are there other avenues that opponents of the Affordable Care Act can take legally to dismantle?
I don't think there are any others that could really totally dismantle. There may be little parts of it that you can challenge. This one, however, if the challenge here had succeeded, that would have been the end of Obamacare, unless states changed their law and established exchanges. What would the chances have been that Arizona would establish its own exchange? I think the Arizona Constitution prohibits it.
Yeah, we can't.
Right?
Yeah.
So if states didn't do it, then Congress could do it. But what are the chances that Congress, this Congress now, would amend the statute so it could have more impact? So it really would have been a big blow to the program. A lot of people would lose their health insurance. But it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. All right, we will keep you on board and try to get your information, your insight and information regarding. They're coming down fast and furious, aren't they?
5 more cases.
Yeah. Good to see you, Paul.
Okay.
Several Phoenix Aviation Department employees have been disciplined after it was found that they learned of the FAA's flight plans, changes to those flight plans out of Sky Harbor, and did nothing. Here to talk about all this is Phoenix City Manager Ed Zerker. Good to have you in the program.
Thanks for having me.
You betcha. Thanks for internal investigation now into these flight path changes. What prompted the investigation?
So we had some information in February or March that an FAA official had spoken at a conference and said that one of our employees had known information about this prior to the time when we thought that they had known. So with that information, we procured the services of a law firm to come in and do a thorough top-to-bottom review, lay out a timeline, and tell us who knew what, when, how. And so that's the result is a 24-page report that's available at skyharbor.com for anyone to read that details what the city of Phoenix knew and when our staff knew it.
And the investigation found that at least 6 aviation officials knew this maybe as far back as 2012?
Right, there were 6 people working for the aviation department. Not all 6 knew for the whole time. It started with 1 and then a couple more, and then over the last year, a couple more. So over that time period, there were a total of 6.
Were they high-ranking officials?
It ranged everywhere from a frontline employee, a noise specialist, and supervisors of that person, all the way up to the assistant director and the then director of the department.
When did the assistant director and now retired director know?
So they knew about it about a year before the flight paths were implemented by the FAA. And it's important to note, it's the FAA that establishes flight paths. They tell planes where to fly. They have the authority to do that. The airport operator does not. We may have input, but it's the FAA's decision for that.
So they knew about this. Some knew earlier than others, but all the way up to the top, they knew about this. Why wasn't this challenged? Why wasn't the information relayed to others, if it was not relayed to others?
Sure, and that's really the basis of this. And that's really what's the most disappointing thing to me about this is that we had staff members who were engaged with the FAA as they were developing these things. They were communicating that up through their chain of command, sometimes too slowly, but then it came to a point and it stopped. It didn't move forward. There was nothing raised for over a year so that there could be any reaction made to that. For whatever reasons, that it didn't come forward, and that's the disappointing part.
It sounds like the report suggests that they were maybe more concerned about managing public reaction than getting that information out there accurately.
I think there was a lot of confusion. You know, we have perfect hindsight. We have 20/20 vision and hindsight. Now that airplanes are actually flying over places, people see what that means. At that point, they were lines on a map. It doesn't excuse it, but that's what they were going. And there was confusion about, will the FAA come back? No one from the FAA has contacted the aviation director. What are the next steps? But that doesn't change the fact that there should have been more information brought forward to the public sooner by our officials, and more questions, as you said very accurately, more questions asked, more pushing done back on the FAA.
As far as other high-ranking city officials, you, others, when did you know? When did these others know? When did elected officials first know?
Less than 2 weeks before the actual flight paths were changed was when that was brought to City Hall. By then it was too late. It was more of, this is happening, there's no way to stop it, and so we just have to be ready for whatever the outcome of that is.
Was it a secret amongst these employees, or was it just basically inertia?
I think it was inertia, and the board actually uses that word, that, you know, there was so much deference given to the FAA because they regulate the airport, they regulate flight paths. You know, they're going to make the decision that breaking through that to push back on them and say, why, how, show me why you can do this. And that's really it. But, you know, so I'm disappointed in our employees, and they're being disciplined for that. I'm really upset, though, with the FAA because it appears to me from reading this that there was a clear strategy to avoid talking to anyone at a high level at the city. We interact with the FAA all the time at the airport on multiple levels. But the report detailed that clearly they never did. In fact, I'll read you a section. It says the FAA did not directly contact any senior member of the aviation department prior to the fall of 2014. Instead, for reasons unknown, the FAA chose to make its sole point of contact at the lowest levels of the aviation department. So that doesn't excuse the lack of communication from our folks when they knew from their staff. But there is no good explanation from the FAA as to why they did not bring something this important forward to our officials when they were talking to them about other items all the time.
With that in mind, with also the indication that inertia was at the helm here, you have two different avenues. How does either avenue affect the lawsuit against the FAA?
Well, I don't know. We are being totally transparent here. We're laying all our cards out on the table. We're making it clear to people. Most of this is based on public record, things that are already available and that the lawsuit will have anyway. We just put it into this form. And so, its impact on the lawsuit, I guess, is important, but what's more important is the public's trust in the city that we told them, we're going to let you know what we know when we know it, and that's what this report does.
Indeed, and you mentioned discipline. There's reprimands, there are suspensions and demotions.
Yeah.
But again, it sounds like some of these folks may have actually been lying to the public when they expressed concerns or asked questions. Some folks, not lying? You don't think so?
I don't know that our staff lied. I think from the beginning of in September and October, November, December in public meetings, our staff have said, we had talked to the FAA, and our staff had talked to us. We didn't know what it meant, and we thought they were going to come back to us again with more opportunity to talk to them. So I don't think it's that. It's just we missed the opportunity to raise the issue.
No, but I was speaking of the original staff, not necessarily you or elected members, but staff that were maybe contacted initially by residents saying, "What the heck's going on here?" I guess the criticism is that no one has actually lost their job over this. You think this is a fireable offense?
No. And you have to understand it in this way. We have four of these employees are covered by civil service. Would have been covered. Three of the employees are covered by the civil service. They have rights that are laid out, and they have appeal rights. So I've got to be careful about talking about that. One of the employees who remains, the director, was demoted and was given 40 hours off without pay. That's pretty severe in the case where we're not talking about criminal activity here. We're talking about a lapse in judgment. A mistake was made by an employee who otherwise has a very good track record with the city. So we're holding our folks accountable in the way that fits within our personnel system. What I would say, though, is I'd like to see someone at the FAA held accountable in the same way. The FAA has never come forward and given us any information about what they knew and when they knew it. And why didn't they talk to us? Why did they stay focused on the very entry-level employee and never come and talk to us about what they were doing?
Real quickly, any indication they ask those entry-level employees not to say anything to higher-ups?
No. And again, that's the problem, is those employees had a responsibility to communicate through all the way up to the director, and that's what the accountability is for, is a failure to do that.
All right. Hey, it's good to have you in the program. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it.
Levels at Lake Mead sank to a record low earlier this week. The lake fell below a mark that will trigger a water supply shortage if recoveries aren't forecast for the end of the year. Tom McCann is Deputy General Manager of Central Arizona Project, joins us right now. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
This new record low water level at Lake Mead, what exactly are we talking about here?
It's a couple of feet lower than it was a couple of years ago. It's not really as big a deal as some people are trying to make it into. We've got rules that are in place that determine when we're going to have a reduction, when we'll have a shortage. Yeah, we're getting closer to that point, but you mentioned if the lake isn't projected to come back up, and in fact it is. May was a pretty good month in terms of rainfall, and upper basin, Colorado, and Lake Powell's come up, and right now we're actually anticipating that the lake's going to come up several more feet before the end of the year.
I think the concern is that this new level kind of hits that trigger mark. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and a lot of people get kind of mixed up. They see that trigger at 1075, but it's not an instantaneous trigger.
Right.
There's a decision made once a year. The decision's made in August, and it's based on the projection in August of what the level of the lake will be at the end of the calendar year. So really what we need to look at is, in August coming up, what is the Bureau of Reclamation going to project as the elevation of Lake Mead at the end of this year? And right now, they're actually predicting that there is a negligible probability that it's going to be below 1075 by the end of the year.
And again, the 1075 was taken earlier this week. How many days ago was that, and could that level be different even now?
It is. I looked at it earlier today. This morning around midnight it was 1074.9 something, and then around noontime it was 1075.0 something. So yeah, it varies all the time.
And in August now, officially, what happens? Would you look at the weather patterns? Do you look at the water? I mean, look at the past and future?
The Bureau of Reclamation is the one that does the study, and they do it every month. They call it the 24-month study, looking out 2 years ahead. And they take all that into account. They take in the past record of what's happened in terms of precipitation, snowpacks, et cetera. They take in the projected uses. We know what the states are going to be using in the lower basin out of Lake Mead. We have a pretty good idea because we have rules about how much water gets released from Lake Powell every year. So we know based on the elevation of Lake Powell how much water is going to come down to Lake Mead, and we can predict pretty closely based on that.
That's interesting because I think a lot of people, we never hear about Lake Powell. We don't know what's going on there, yet Lake Powell feeds Lake Mead. If Lake Mead's levels drop below precipitous levels and hit these trigger marks, what's going on over at Lake Powell?
That's a good question. And it kind of depends ultimately on what the snowpack's been like in the upper basin. But generally speaking, the guidelines that were put in place in 2007 have Lake Mead and Lake Powell operating in tandem. So when Lake Mead is down and Lake Powell is up, we release more water from Powell down to Mead. If Lake Mead is high, if that could come up, and Lake Powell was low, then Lake Powell wouldn't release as much. Right now, Lake Powell is sort of in the middle, and Lake Mead is a little lower. So we've been getting a little extra water. We got a little extra water this year, and right now we're projecting that next year we're going to get a little bit extra over what would be the normal year.
So water management with Lake Powell is a factor here.
Oh, it is, absolutely, yeah.
So if we, I don't want to go to a worst case scenario, but let's go ahead. We got you here. We might as well do it. Let's say the forecast says, no, this doesn't look good for January. It looks below 1075. What happens?
Worst case, and right now there's still about a 50-50 chance of a shortage in 2017, and the answer is the same then too. So in the first level of shortage below 1075, the Central Arizona project would be cut about 320,000 acre feet. It's about 20% of our supply. Now the people that are going to get impacted by that really are the farmers in Central Arizona. They are the lowest priority users within our system. The cities and the Indian tribes actually have a higher priority. So even if we have shortage, it's not going to affect the water that's available to the cities that comes out of people's taps. There's not going to be any change there.
But up to 50% cut from CAP to agriculture, huh? Is that possible?
About 50% of the water being delivered to agriculture
Yes.
today, yeah. And for those users, they would have choices to make. They could farm less. They could go back to groundwater pumping to make up the difference. They could look at other arrangements potentially.
Are there incentives to some of these farmers to leave some fields fallow and maybe not use so much water?
There are. We have put into place arrangements this year, starting this year, to leave additional water in Lake Mead, and it's for exactly the reason that we're talking about, that if we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement where they use less water this year and leave that water behind, then maybe that puts off that shortage for next year or the year after. And right now it looks like that's working.
But the bottom line here, the Colorado River is over-allocated. I mean, is that pretty much general consensus here?
I'd put it this way, that the amount of water that's as a whole that's being used in the basin today is about the amount of water that we get on average. Now, we haven't had average years lately, so that's been a problem. But within the lower basin, the three states, Arizona, California, Nevada, and Mexico, The problem we have is we use more water every year than we get in. So in the long term, and really what that means is in the next few years here, we need to be addressing that problem so that we don't have that bigger problem down the road.
All right. It's good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Friday on Arizona Horizon, it's the Journalists Roundtable. We will have more on how the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on the Affordable Care Act will impact Arizona, and we'll discuss how small charter schools were saved from massive spending cuts. That's Friday on the Journalists Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.